The air was thick with heat and the smell of burning rice fields. Helicopter blades thundered across the Mekong Delta, whipping up dust and water as ARVN soldiers leapt into the mud below. Villagers scattered, clutching what little they could carry, while gunfire cracked from hidden tree lines. For a moment, the entire delta seemed alive with chaos. Men shouting, bullets snapping, and the roar of American gunships spitting fire into the swamps. This was Operation Kien Long, April 1967. The mission sounded simple on paper. Drive the Viet Cong out of their strongholds in the Châu Đốc Province, cut their supply lines from Cambodia, and win the support of the local people. But nothing in Vietnam was ever simple. The Mekong Delta was no ordinary battlefield. It was a vast maze of canals, rice paddies, and mangrove swamps where the enemy could vanish like smoke. To the Viet Cong, it was home turf. To the ARVN and their American allies, it was a nightmare. What unfolded during Operation Kien Long was more than just another search and destroy mission. It became a test of South Vietnam's ability to stand on its own, a measure of America's strategy in the Delta, and a glimpse into the larger truth of the war. That body counts and temporary victories meant little when the enemy could always return. Before the Tet Offensive shocked the world in 1968, battles like Kien Long already revealed the cracks in America's approach. Helicopters and firepower could clear villages, but they could not hold them. And as the smoke settled over the Mekong, the question remained, who really controlled the Delta? The government in Saigon, or the shadowy fighters who melted back into the night? To understand Operation Kien Long, we first need to understand the battlefield itself. The Mekong Delta. This vast region in southern Vietnam was unlike anywhere else in the country. Instead of mountains or thick jungles, the Delta was a watery labyrinth of rivers, canals, rice paddies, and mangrove swamps. Movement was slow, visibility was poor, and nearly every patch of ground could conceal danger. For the Viet Cong, the Delta was a natural fortress. Its countless waterways served as hidden highways, carrying weapons and supplies from Cambodia into the heart of South Vietnam. Villages scattered along the canals offered shelter, food, and recruits. Guerrilla fighters blended in with the local population by day, then struck at night before vanishing back into the wetlands. For American and South Vietnamese forces, chasing them was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Châu Đốc Province, where Operation Kien Long would unfold, was especially critical. It sat near the Cambodian border, a lifeline for Viet Cong infiltration. Securing this area meant more than just driving the enemy out. It meant cutting off one of their most important supply routes. By 1967, U.S. strategy in Vietnam was shifting. Large-scale search and destroy missions, while effective at producing body counts, weren't breaking the Viet Cong's control of the countryside. Washington and Saigon turned to pacification, clearing villages of communist influence and convincing the rural population to support the South Vietnamese government. Winning hearts and minds became just as important as winning battles. But in practice, pacification in the Delta was brutally difficult. Villagers were often caught between the two sides. By day, government forces demanded loyalty. By night, the Viet Cong came for food and shelter. Choosing the wrong side could mean death. Operation Kien Long was born from this struggle. It wasn't just about killing enemy fighters. It was about proving that Saigon could protect its people and push the Viet Cong out of their sanctuary in the Delta. The stakes were high, and failure would echo far beyond Châu Đốc flooded rice fields. By early 1967, both the United States and South Vietnam were searching for ways to demonstrate progress in the war. The Mekong Delta had become a symbol of that challenge. If Saigon could secure the Delta, it would not only protect the nation's rice bowl, but also prove that the government could stand on its own against the Viet Cong. Operation Kien Long was designed with these ambitions in mind. The mission had three main objectives. 1. Eliminate Viet Cong strongholds in Châu Đốc Province. 2. Cut infiltration routes running across the Cambodian border. 3. Strengthen the pacification program by showing villagers that ARVN, not the communists, controlled their land. The operation would be led by the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, with American forces in a supporting role. This was no accident. U.S. commanders wanted to highlight ARVN's capabilities and reduce the impression that Americans were fighting the war alone. Advisors were embedded throughout the South Vietnamese units, coordinating artillery, air support, and logistics. The plan relied heavily on U.S. mobility and firepower. Helicopters from the U.S. 1st Aviation Brigade would lift ARVN infantry into landing zones near suspected Viet Cong positions. Gunships would strafe tree lines and canal banks before troops landed. Meanwhile, riverine patrol boats blocked escape routes along the waterways, while artillery batteries stood ready to hammer any large enemy concentration. On paper, the plan seemed airtight. Surround the enemy, cut off their retreat, and grind them down with superior firepower. But there were risks. The terrain gave the Viet Cong countless ways to escape. Local intelligence was unreliable, as many villagers feared reprisals from the communists. And ARVN units, while improving, still struggled with morale and coordination under pressure. Nevertheless, optimism was high. Saigon presented Kien Long as proof that the tide was turning. If the ARVN could succeed here, in one of the Viet Cong's toughest strongholds, it would be a major step towards securing the Delta. What followed would test not only ARVN's strength, but the entire strategy of pacification in South Vietnam. In April 1967, Operation Kien Long began. Before dawn, the quiet of the Mekong Delta was shattered by the thundering blades of American helicopters sweeping low over rice paddies. Below, South Vietnamese soldiers waited nervously, ready to be lifted into landing zones near villages suspected of harboring Viet Cong units. The first assaults came fast. Helicopters dropped ARVN infantry into fields still wet with morning dew, while U.S. gunships unleashed rockets and machine gun fire into tree lines and canal banks. The goal was to pin the enemy down before they could slip away. From above, the operation looked methodical. Troops fanning out, gunfire erupting, smoke rising from thatched huts struck by artillery. On the ground, however, the picture was far less controlled. ARVN soldiers waded through knee-deep water, weighed down by heavy packs and rifles. Progress was slow, and every step carried the risk of triggering a booby trap hidden in the mud. As they advanced, villagers fled in confusion. Some out of fear of being caught in the crossfire, others unsure whether they should be loyal to Saigon or the communists. Initial contact with the Viet Cong was sharp and deadly. Small arms fire cracked from hidden bunkers, and sniper shots rang out from treetop positions. The Viet Cong did not try to hold ground for long. They struck quickly, then melted into the swamps and canals. Still, their resistance slowed the ARVN advance and forced commanders to call in American artillery and airstrikes to clear suspected strongholds. Within hours, hamlets were torn apart. Roofs collapsed under shell fire, rice stores burned, and families scattered into the fields. To ARVN officers, this destruction was the necessary price of rooting out the Viet Cong. But to the villagers who lost everything in a single morning, it was another reminder that war offered no safe side. The opening phase of Kien Long showed both the strengths and weaknesses of the operation. With U.S. support, ARVN could move quickly and deliver punishing firepower. Yet even in these first clashes, it was clear the Viet Cong would not fight conventionally. They would retreat, regroup, and wait for their chance to strike back. As Operation Kien Long unfolded, the true challenge of fighting in the Mekong Delta became clear. The terrain itself seemed to conspire against the South Vietnamese and their American allies. Every rice paddy was a shallow trap of mud and water. Every canal was a hidden highway the Viet Cong could use to move unseen. Even the dense groves of palm and bamboo concealed bunkers, spider holes, and booby traps waiting for the unwary. ARVN units advanced cautiously, often with American helicopters circling overhead to provide cover. But despite their numbers and firepower, they struggled to draw the enemy into a decisive fight. The Viet Cong refused to stand and trade blows in open battle. Instead, they fought on their own terms. Ambushes, sniper fire, and sudden bursts of machine gun fire from hidden bunkers. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they melted back into the waterways or slipped across the Cambodian border. The fighting was a cat-and-mouse struggle. In one moment, an ARVN patrol might stumble into a deadly ambush on a narrow dike, losing men to sniper fire before calling in artillery to level the tree line. In another, riverine patrol boats exchange fire with Viet Cong fighters hidden along the canal banks, their bullets sparking off the metal hulls before the boats answered with heavy machine guns and mortars. Booby traps were a constant menace. Tripwires stretched across narrow paths triggered grenades or punji stake pits, leaving soldiers wounded before they ever saw the enemy. These traps slowed the advance to a crawl and sapped morale, turning every step into a gamble. When ARVN units did manage to corner larger Viet Cong formations, they relied heavily on American support. Gunships raked the ground with rockets, artillery rumbled from distant fire bases, and jets screamed overhead, dropping bombs into suspected hiding spots. The results were devastating on the landscape, but often inconclusive against the elusive enemy. At night, control shifted again. ARVN troops dug in, setting up defensive positions in captured villages. But as darkness fell, the Viet Cong returned. They launched mortar attacks, harassed patrols, and used the cover of night to slip back among the villagers. The same hamlet, secured by day, could be back under communist influence by morning. The Delta seemed to belong to no one and everyone at the same time. For the ARVN, each firefight and airstrike was proof of progress. For the Viet Cong, every successful ambush or night raid reinforced their hold on the countryside. And for the civilians caught in between, Operation Kien Long was less about liberation and more about survival. For the people of the Mekong Delta, Operation Kien Long was not a story of strategy or military pride. It was a story of survival. Villages that had stood for generations were suddenly caught in the crossfire of artillery, airstrikes, and gunship fire. Families fled their homes with whatever they could carry, scattering across the rice fields in search of safety. The pacification program, which the operation was meant to support, depended on winning the trust of these very villagers. But in practice, the destruction often drove them further away from Saigon's cause. When homes were burned and rice stores destroyed, people questioned whether the government could really protect them, or whether siding with the Viet Cong might be the safer option. The problem was deeper than just collateral damage. The Viet Cong had built a shadow government in much of the Delta, collecting taxes, organizing local militias, and enforcing loyalty through both persuasion and fear. By day, villagers might cooperate with ARVN soldiers marching through their hamlets. By night, they were expected to feed and shelter Viet Cong fighters, and punishment for disobedience could be swift and brutal. Caught between these two forces, ordinary people learned to say what each side wanted to hear while keeping their true loyalties hidden. For many, neutrality was impossible. One wrong choice could mean being labeled a collaborator and executed, either by the communists or by government forces. Refugee numbers swelled as displaced families crowded into government-controlled towns. Official reports counted this as progress, proof that villages were being cleared of communist influence. But in reality, every uprooted family represented another failure to secure the countryside. Instead of building trust, Operation Kien Long often deepened resentment. The human toll of the operation revealed the fatal contradiction in the pacification strategy. Firepower could clear a village, but it could not hold it. And the more destruction that followed in the wake of liberation, the harder it became for Saigon and Washington to win the battle for hearts and minds. By the time Operation Kien Long wound down, the South Vietnamese government declared it a success. Official reports claimed that hundreds of Viet Cong fighters had been killed, weapons caches uncovered, and infiltration routes disrupted. Photographs of ARVN troops patrolling villages and stacks of captured rifles were circulated as proof that progress was being made in the Mekong Delta. On paper, these numbers looked impressive. Commanders in Saigon pointed to body counts as evidence that their army was growing stronger and that pacification was working. For U.S. advisors, Kien Long was also useful propaganda, showing that ARVN, with American support, could mount a large-scale operation against a difficult enemy. But the reality on the ground told a different story. The Viet Cong had not been destroyed. Most units simply avoided large engagements, retreating across the border into Cambodia or dispersing into the maze of canals and swamps. Those who were killed were often quickly replaced as new recruits joined from local villages or slipped in from North Vietnamese supply lines. Within weeks, many of the same areas that had been cleared were once again under communist influence. The operation's impact on civilians further undermined its achievements. While some hamlets were declared secured, they were often left depopulated, their people displaced into refugee camps or government towns. For every Viet Cong killed, there were countless villagers who had lost homes, crops, and family members. These losses eroded trust in Saigon, and in many cases quietly pushed families closer to the communist side. Even American officials admitted privately that the gains were temporary. Without permanent security, the Viet Cong could return as soon as ARVN forces moved on. Kien Long highlighted a central problem of the war. Success measured in statistics did not equal lasting control on the ground. In the end, Operation Kien Long produced headlines and body counts, but it did not change the balance of power in the Delta. It was another example of a costly campaign that achieved little beyond momentary disruption of the enemy. Operation Kien Long was only one campaign among many in the Mekong Delta, but it revealed larger truths about the Vietnam War. On the surface, the operation showed that ARVN could mount coordinated attacks with U.S. support. Helicopters, river patrols, artillery, and infantry all worked together in a complex operation. To outside observers, this looked like progress, evidence that the South Vietnamese Army was maturing into a capable fighting force. Yet beneath this veneer of success lay the same problems that haunted the wider war. The Viet Cong refused to fight conventionally, denying RVN the decisive victories it needed. Villages that were cleared during the day often returned to communist control by night. The reliance on body counts as a measure of success ignored the reality that the Viet Cong could replenish their ranks far faster than Saigon could secure the countryside. Kien Long also demonstrated the heavy dependence of RVN on American support. Without U.S. helicopters to lift troops, without artillery to suppress ambushes, and without airstrikes to destroy bunkers, RVN struggled to sustain operations in the Delta. This reliance raised serious doubts about South Vietnam's ability to hold its ground once U.S. forces eventually withdrew. Politically, the operation highlighted the contradiction of the pacification program. Winning hearts and minds required stability and trust, but military operations like Kien Long often left behind destruction and displacement. Rather than securing loyalty, they deepened resentment and created fertile ground for Viet Cong influence. In hindsight, Kien Long was a warning sign. Less than a year later, the Tet Offensive would explode across South Vietnam, shattering the illusion that pacification was succeeding. The lessons of the Delta, that temporary victories could not secure lasting control, had been visible all along. Kien Long was one more step in a pattern of costly operations that looked successful on paper, but failed to alter the course of the war. Operation Kien Long was launched with bold promises. It was meant to show that South Vietnam could secure its own countryside, cut off enemy supply routes, and win the loyalty of the people in the Mekong Delta. For a brief moment, the numbers seemed to tell that story. Hundreds of Viet Cong reported killed, weapons seized, villages declared liberated. On paper, it was a success, but wars are not won on paper. The Viet Cong slipped away into Cambodia or returned to the Delta once the operation ended. Villages that had been cleared during the day often fell back under communist influence at night, and the civilians who were supposed to be pacified instead found themselves displaced, their homes destroyed, their fields burned. In many cases, the very people the government sought to win over were pushed further away. Kien Long exposed the paradox at the heart of the Vietnam War. Superior firepower and mobility could sweep the battlefield, but they could not hold it. Each operation seemed to repeat the same cycle: advance, clash, destroy, withdraw, only for the Viet Cong to return. The human toll mounted, yet the political balance remained unchanged. In hindsight, Kien Long was a preview of the frustrations to come. It foreshadowed the Tet Offensive, when the illusion of progress would shatter in a single wave of coordinated attacks. It highlighted the deep flaws in the strategy of measuring success by body counts instead of genuine security. The thunder of helicopters and the crack of gunfire in Châu Đốc Province in April 1967 were meant to signal victory. Instead, they became another echo of a war defined by fleeting gains and enduring uncertainty. Operation Kien Long proved that clearing territory was not the same as controlling it. and that in the Mekong Delta, America and its allies could never truly hold the ground they fought so hard to win. Operation Kien Long was supposed to be a turning point. It was designed to prove that Saigon and Washington could tame the Mekong Delta, crush the Viet Cong, and protect the people who live there. But instead of ending uncertainty, it exposed it. Instead of building trust, it bred resentment. And instead of lasting victory, it delivered only temporary gains that dissolved as quickly as they were won. For the men who fought there, the memories of knee-deep mud, sudden ambushes, and the ever-present fear of traps never faded. For the villagers, the scars were just as deep. Burned fields, shattered homes, and the constant sense of being caught between two unforgiving sides. The official reports spoke of numbers and victories, but the people of the Delta lived a reality far different from the statistics. Looking back, Kien Long was not just a military operation. It was a symbol of the wider war, a conflict where overwhelming firepower could take ground but not keep it, where promises of liberation often brought only destruction, and where winning hearts and minds proved far harder than winning battles. The Mekong Delta remained a contested land long after the last helicopters lifted away, and the lesson it offered still lingers. In wars like Vietnam, success is never just about body counts or captured villages. It is about trust, endurance, and legitimacy. Things no airstrike or artillery barrage could ever deliver. Operation Kien Long reminds us that some victories exist only on paper, while the true outcome is written in the lives of those who endure the fight. And in the Delta of 1967, that outcome was clear. The war was far from over, and its deepest battles had only just begun.